the Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. As you can tell, we are recording this webinar, so you can mute or change your video status as you are most comfortable. So reminder, we do these monthly and we have different topics of conversation. And as we are launching this new center, we thought it'd be great for you to hear directly from the advisory committee that we have assembled to guide our priorities in science and tell us how we're doing. So we're going to have a panel discussion, and so think about questions that you might like to ask. In the meantime, we have a special welcome. So Kristen, if you want to advance, we have a new program manager based at the University of Minnesota, Alyssa Welch, and so she's going to unmute and say a couple of words and tell you a little bit more about her role.
Great, thanks, Olivia. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. As Olivia mentioned, my name is Alyssa Welch. I am the new program manager for the Midwest CASC as of last week. So I am very excited to join and learn all about the partnerships and people and research and projects that, that make the Midwest CASC and the larger CASC network. I'm joining the University of Minnesota from the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service at Ohio University, where I worked for 17 years. And there I managed a portfolio of externally funded projects, largely related to energy, waste management, STEM outreach, and other environmental topics. Originally from the Midwest, grew up in Ohio, and got my undergraduate and graduate degrees from the Midwest as well in environmental policy. I'm, like I said, looking forward to joining Midwest CASC and all that it is in its multidisciplinary glory. And it's focused on partnerships and regional relevance in the climate adaptation space. So thank you. I look forward to getting to know more of you and just joining the crew here. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Welcome again, very excited. And then if you can advance the next slide, Kristen. So I would like to introduce you to the full list of the advisory committee, and something a little unsurprised, I see the number of committees that are on the call. And so I'm going to ask, as your name comes up, you just sort of pop up and say hello and your name and organization. So Matthew.
Hi there, I'm Matt Anderson. I'm with BIA.
Thank you. Bureau of Indian Affairs for the non-Fed folks. Brad.
Hey, good afternoon. Brad Potter with the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, I don't think Jennifer's with us today, but Erin Williams.
Hey everybody, I'm Erin Williamson with the National Park Service based in St. Paul, Minnesota.
I think I saw Chris Hoving.
Hi folks, I am Chris Hoving. I am the Adaptation Specialist with the Michigan DNR and also representing the MAFWA Climate Adaptation Technical Committee.
Great, I don't think Matt is with us. Hilary, I thought I saw, is Hilary on?
Hi, Olivia. Yeah, I'm on. Hi, everyone. This is Hilary Sorenson. I am the climate biologist with the 1854 Treaty Authority. We're an intertribal natural resources agency governed by Boys Fort and Grand Portage.
Great, and then Jeff.
Hi, everyone. Jeff Mears with WCAC. I'll have more to say at the panel discussion, so thank you.
There you go. Good, good job, Jeff. Maria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Genoviak. I'm the acting director of the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science and the Northern Forest Climate Hub.
Okay, I think I got everyone. Did I miss anyone?
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Owen Boyle, Wisconsin DNR. Thanks, Olivia. Try not to take it personally.
Thank you, Owen. Oh, Jen Lacey too.
Yep, I'm here, Deputy Regional Director for Science for the USGS Mid-Continent region.
Awesome, great. So we have a large crew of very busy people that we really appreciate your time. So thank you for humoring me for sharing a little bit your faces and your role. Just to talk a little bit about the advisory committee. So if you can skip to the roles and responsibilities slide. So they are here to represent the organizational challenges. What are those key climate management challenges, and share those priorities to inform our science planning, our call for proposals. Engaging fellows, faculty, others with their broader organizations, and then also let us know how we're doing, like providing feedback on the implementation. And then it's really our role, and I speak sort of broadly for all of us, like to be responsible to really engage in meaningful ways, not in superficial loading dock approaches, to deliver work that is high quality, best available science, and then listen, evaluate, and improve. And sort of that's sort of the core agreement that we have. And so I'm going to ask, as we come into the sort of broader discussion that other advisory committee members engage as they're interested in the conversation. But what we'll do is we just recently went through a prioritization exercise to inform our call for fiscal year 23 priorities. And if you can go to the next slide, Kristen. And these are the priorities that came up from as most in common out of the set of 50 or so across the advisory committee. So impacts of extreme rainfall, looking at warming and the effects on fish, water fluctuations, future distribution of forests and structure of those forests, future distribution abundance of priority wildlife species, range shifts or extirpation from tribal lands, how we restore lands under future conditions, climate-informed decision support, co-benefits, and then how we design monitoring programs to detect and respond to climate change. So we'll have more information on these, but to set up the conversation today, we asked them to share a little bit more about some of these priorities and sort of how it fits into some of their challenges. So with that, I'll introduce the panel. So next slide, if you can come on and turn on your video. So Brad Potter from Fish and Wildlife Service, Erin Williamson from National Park Service, Jeff Mears from Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council, and Maria Genoviak from the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. So if you come on, and then perhaps we can stop share for a moment, Kristen. And then Kristen will pick up, so each person will take 3 or 4 minutes to share a little bit about themselves, their organization, their climate work. And then from there, we'll go into a couple of moderated questions that Kristen will lead us in, and then open discussion as well. So, okay, with that, Maria, you're first on my screen. You want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I introduced myself already, but so I'm Maria Genoviak. I work for the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science and the USDA Northern Forest Climate Hub, both of which I actually work for the U.S. Forest Service. And so just to talk more about our specific work, but what we really do is focus on science translation related to climate and carbon. We focus much of our work in the 20-state region that encompasses the same footprint as the Midwest and Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Centers. And so we've worked really for a long time side by side with the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, and we're excited for the Midwest CASC now to be in place. And yeah, I think that's probably a good start for now, but we've been in the adaptation space for a long time and are really excited about this partnership.
Great, thank you. Jeff.
Oh, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Mears. I'm a member of the Oneida Nation, and I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council, or WCAC. Thanks, Olivia, for the invitation to present. So WCAC was established in 2001 as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We provide a forum for tribal nations in Wisconsin on natural resource and agricultural issues on tribal lands. Tribal Conservation Advisory Councils were first authorized in response to the 1995 Farm Bill as advisory bodies to NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, so the USDA. So advisory bodies to NRCS and all of USDA on tribal issues. WCAC was the first such council formed in the country. So just how we're set up, then each of the 11 federally recognized tribal nations in Wisconsin have a representative on WCAC. They're appointed by their elected leadership. Our board includes a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And just as an FYI, Wisconsin also has a 12th tribe, the Brothertown tribe, They're not currently federally recognized, but they are looking, moving in that direction. So again, some of our programs that we have, we provide that, I don't know, that liaison role with USDA programs, trying to do outreach to the tribes and what they do. And, and just from personal experience, I worked for my tribe, the Oneida Nation, for 25 plus years, managed in their environmental health and safety area. And we worked with EPA almost exclusively, working with EPA on a lot of different issues that we're dealing with. And, you know, just my experience now working with the USDA, another federal agency, but just the nice fit that the USDA has and work with the tribes, because the USDA and especially the NRCS, and since there's a lot of feds here, I'll just keep throwing these acronyms around like you're following me. But, you know, all the stuff that they do is on a voluntary basis. So that really has a nice fit with the tribes instead of the regulatory basis that you had with the EPA. So it just has a really a different feel, I guess, in some of the programs that they're trying to do. So we work with the USDA and the tribes on practices on land, these voluntary practices they can do to protect natural resources. We've expanded, like I said, we've been around just 21 years now. And the first, the bulk of that time has been working with natural resource issues, but that natural fit is going into agriculture, working more and providing training for the tribes from USDA. A lot of the tribes are looking back to get back to more of their agricultural ways. And I've seen the pandemic kind of increase that interest in community gardens. You know, obviously wild rice, been working with a long time, and different things that the tribes are working on, more of that thinking of, especially you go through with the supply chain issues, and it works right with climate change and local food and being more in charge of their food. And we've been involved in several tribal food sovereignty conferences that have been held. And one of the nice things I had is they had a big poster up there that said, you can't be a sovereign nation unless you can feed yourself. And really looking at that as being the goal, that the tribes are providing that food locally. So we also, and just another thing that we do is we also have an intern program every year, a 10-week working with college interns. And they work for the different tribes. They work for some of the USDA, the NRCS agency, for the Forest Service. They're partners and they provide those opportunities for them. So that's really a big part of what we do. We've been doing that now for just over 10 years. And that's just really a nice way to connect with the USDA and the tribes and getting that experience. We have them doing a lot of it with the APHIS, with the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service under USDA, sampling things for like emerald ash borer and all the moss and everything else that's out there, detecting those in the tribes and reporting back to the USDA. So we're part of that network that's surveying for these invasive species. The questions for all about your organization's work on climate change. Again, it's all related, obviously, to the natural resources, the agriculture. You can't have a healthy environment without good practices in agriculture, and you can't have good agriculture without a healthy environment. So it really is that nexus there where we find ourselves in working. So the work on climate change, it just refers to, it's just interesting. I was on last week on a group that was looking on developing for the next farm bill coming up, priorities and things. And it was a large group that was in, it was held by UW, and there's a large group of producers and things all over Wisconsin. And one person got on there and said, you know, this time maybe we shouldn't focus on climate change so much in the farm bill, yet focus more on working with producers and all the other things that needs to be done for healthy agriculture in the United States. And I just think that the point I had is made at the meeting was that every bill is a climate change bill. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's infrastructure or transportation or agriculture. Climate change is the new normal we're all living under. It has to be dealt with. It can't be ignored. So when I think of the things that our organization does on climate change, it's that long time working on natural resource and agriculture, that it's all under climate change. It's just not always identified as climate change. But with that said, we do have a new grant. We're going to be hiring a community conservationist to work with all the tribes. And a big part of that is going to be rolling out for the USDA's climate smart agriculture. So really excited about that, working more directly, thinking about climate change and some of the things that we're already doing and how well that fits into that. So I think that's all I had to start with. And there's our logo. So, you know, WCAC, Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council. So thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Erin?
Sure. And do you want us to be answering some of the questions now or wait?
We'll come back to those. Yep.
Okay. All right. So I'm Erin Williams. As I mentioned, I'm based out of St. Paul, Minnesota. and I work for the National Park Service. I actually work for our regional office based in Omaha, Nebraska. And so in the Park Service, we have a little bit different structure where we have what's called a Washington office, which actually is primarily in Colorado. And we have a regional offices in 7 different areas. But we have over 400 parks that all receive their budgets directly from Congress. And so the superintendents are not, they don't have we don't have the same budget structure as some other federal agencies. And so part of what I'm going to speak to a little bit is, there are different layers of working with the Park Service and with parks specifically. And so I think if you haven't heard of our climate change response program, I'll put the link in the chat. They're doing a lot of effort and work, and they're a small group, but they're a mighty group. And so we kind of have that Washington level, nationwide big picture perspective. And then those folks try and work on different components that fit in with park needs and regional needs in a very different way than I am used to at some other federal agencies. So we have a lot of various programs. We have Natural Resource Program is my home base program. We have cultural resource efforts. We have facilities, education outreach, research, monitoring. And then we have some internships. Maybe you've heard of some of the internships that we have focused on climate change, and some of the terminology has changed around that. So it can be hard to track. So I'll just pause there and answer some more specific questions when we get to that, but happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Erin. Brad's ready.
All right, yeah, I'm ready to go. Good afternoon. I'm Brad Potter. I'm stationed in actually East Lansing, Michigan, right down the road from Gary, maybe a couple miles, with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service as a whole, just to give you the big picture, we have several trust responsibilities. That includes our tribal trust responsibilities, our work with migratory birds, our work with the Endangered Species Act and federally threatened and endangered species, conservation and management of our national wildlife refuge lands and everything that calls those lands home. And then fish, or I guess the term we use is interjurisdictional fish. So those that cut across multiple state jurisdictions. And so we have a pretty broad set of responsibilities in the Fish and Wildlife Service, and any number of conservation and management decisions, actually all of those conservation and management decisions are in those areas should be requiring a consideration of climate and climate change in the decision making. I work specifically with the Science Applications Program in the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is a program that's set up to take on some of our most pressing and complex conservation challenges across the region, and especially those challenges that cut across our Fish and Wildlife Service program. So they don't, these are issues like climate change that don't sit neatly within an individual program like migratory birds, which administers the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, or our Ecological Services Program, which focuses on administration of the Endangered Species Act and so on. And so I'll go into specifics a little bit later here soon too, as more questions are asked.
Okay, Kristen, you ready to pick up?
As long as I can unmute myself, yes. All right, so hi everyone, my name is Kristen Boris. You've met me in previous webinars. I am the research coordinator for the Midwest CASC, and predominantly work with Olivia on this side of managing our portfolio, work closely with our PIs on any projects and issues they have, and especially on building bridges and partnerships between PIs and also within the region. So I've introduced myself on a previous meeting, but I wanted to just kind of remind everybody. I'm going to take over right now for Olivia to ask some questions of our panel here. And so we've gotten a little bit of background from everyone so far on their organization. And Jeff kind of kicked us off with talking about exactly how his organization works on climate issues. And so I want to put that question back out to the group of, you've given us some background on your organization. Could you share with us some more specific initiatives on climate or how you guys are working on climate? And Maria, you shared some of that as well, but just want to put that back out there and let others jump in. Maybe Erin or Brad, you want to lead off since you guys didn't get as much into that.
You want to go first, Erin?
Sure.
Go for it.
Okay. So, and your introduction actually reminded me, Brad, I wanted to mention one of the heavy lifts at the Park Service is our mission. So our mission is to preserve natural resource, cultural resource, land, education, stories, all kinds of things that your National Park Service, parks, monuments, etc., is to preserve these unimpaired for future generations. So you can automatically see the challenge that we have with climate change. How do you decide what you're going to preserve unimpaired when you're already behind the curve with resources to manage facilities and trails and all kinds of things that are already, in less than stellar condition? So our climate change response program has been really active with USGS and others. And they have, I think, one of the really pivotal publications right now is this Resist, Accept, Direct framework. And that is something that it is literally looking at a planning scenario for what elements of climate change can you resist, what are feasible to preserve unimpaired, what elements of climate change do you just need to accept and know what the impacts will be and how to plan and manage within those parameters. And then there are some things about directing that change in maybe a different direction or down a slightly different path or trajectory. So we do have a number of different ways that this happens at various levels. Each park has the opportunity to go through a resource stewardship strategy planning process. And the climate change module or scenario planning can be an important component of that. And so what we try and do is look at what are the desired future conditions at a park, and then how do those resource stewardship strategies try and aim to meet those desired future conditions. And so you can do it as, it's not really a separate module. It's climate change really layers in every single aspect of those desired future conditions. But we need to know, and the parks need to know, what are those future conditions potentially? So we'll take like an extreme example, we'll take a moderate example, and we'll kind of take the status quo to say, okay, what would the conditions look like under various scenarios? And then what does that resource, how is that resource potentially impacted under those different scenarios, planning scenarios? We also are doing some more concerted, how are we planning with our project dollars? How have climate change considerations been factored in or considered with, instead of doing let's call it a riprap project or something that we need to look at the shoreline to amend in, sand movement examples or different things. We can look and say, okay, are you planning for the future scenario? Are you planning for a moderate or mild climate future change? Or are you planning for extreme weather events? And so there's just a couple different layers. I could go on and on, but I think I'll pause there.
So I
Thanks,
can jump
Erin.
in.
Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
can jump in here and describe a little bit about what's going on in the Fish and Wildlife Service. Just at a high level, I think Erin just described one area that we're focused in on as well, that resist, accept, direct framework has become pretty important to our lingo as well. But more importantly, I think is the Fish and Wildlife Service in October released a climate change action program, which isn't a program in the same vein as other similar programs where there's a whole bunch of staff capacity around it. In this case, it just lays out the Fish and Wildlife Service's national approach to climate change at the moment, and there includes a national infrastructure made up of just staff capacity pulling from the different programs and regions to support that approach. There's 7 main elements in that program, from how we make or consider climate adaptation in our conservation decision making, to trying to collaborate on climate science, to pulling together a national conservation adaptation strategy, working with our the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and others, thinking about social and environmental justice in our climate adaptation work, how we think about our role in climate mitigation and working towards net zero emissions, and what policy work needs to be done. And then lastly, which is how do we get our workforce built up with the knowledge and skills that they need to be able to consider climate change in their work. And so right now, that's kind of been the focus of the Fish and Wildlife Service, is that kind of, I guess, those general elements have been laid out at a national scale. There's a lot of dialogue now within the regions, trying to sort through how we step those big picture ideas down into actual implementation within each of the regions. And so we've just got started on that type of work. In the meantime, though, there's a lot of good stuff going on. Each program in each region has a whole lot of activity. And when we think about the Midwest region in particular, we recently went through an assessment of what type of work we were doing under each of those different elements. And it was a pretty impressive list of the amount of work. And so now we're starting to have conversations about, well, what pulls us all together, and what's kind of our overall posture when it comes to combating the issues of climate change as a collective instead of program by program. So, but that work's just getting started. I have high hopes, and I think there's some questions that are coming soon that will dig even a little deeper into some of the priorities for the organization. But overall, that's what's driving us at the moment.
Thanks, Brad. And I do want to go back to Maria and Jeff, but I want to modify the question a tad, because we heard a little bit about climate stuff from both of you, but the successes and opportunities that you're excited about that you want to share with us today. Let's add that onto the question.
Yeah. Do you want to go, Jeff, or do you want me to?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So for folks, just to give a little bit too of the context on this. So I think it's really helpful to hear Erin and Brad's comments. So I think some of the things that are unique about NIACS, and then things that contribute to our challenges and opportunities, or successes and opportunities. So the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science is a multi-institutional partnership. It's led by the Forest Service, but we also have university, tribal, forest industry, private partners. And so we're really think about how do we incorporate climate change to the completely entire spectrum of land management entities that are in the region. And so we've really, and it's much, we started in more of a grassroots sort of way, trying to think about how do we support not only national forests, but state and private and tribal partners, conservation organizations in incorporating climate change into their work. And so our initial climate adaptation project started in 2008, 2009, and we've really had a lot of work developing vulnerability assessments, and then creating the adaptation workbook and adaptation demonstrations. And so I think one piece to kind of get at the successes question is that through a collaborative effort, the climate change response framework and many other projects that we've had in this region with many of the folks who are, here with us today, we have really generated a lot of productivity that goes from, science synthesis all the way to application. And this is where I think it's really wonderful that the CASC is going to add additional resources and support for us to do kind of the next generation of this. So we conducted climate change vulnerability assessments that were supported by CASC funded science, by university scientists who, and again, many people who are in the room here today. And then in developing, the adaptation workbook, we've applied adaptation through hundreds of adaptation demonstrations.
Oh, did we lose Maria? Maria, if you can hear us, we lost you. I'll send her a note too. But Jeff, thank you for volunteering to jump in.
It's like she froze up. Thinking about that question. So just what are the things WCAC works with? And again, I know the acronyms, the USDA NRCS EQIP program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And that works with to provide financial and technical assistance to agricultural producers and non-industrial forest managers, but it's to address natural resource concerns and deliver environmental benefits like improved water and air quality, conserve ground and surface water, increase soil health, reduce soil erosion and sedimentation, improved or created wildlife habitat, mitigation against drought and increased weather volatility. So the EQIP program, and you think of things like cover crops in agriculture and all the different things that they have involved, that's really been a big thing that WCAC has worked on. So prior to the formation of WCAC, very few tribes in Wisconsin were participating in the EQIP program. After we have demonstrated after the WCAC was formed, tribes are now participating, and there's a set aside for the tribes. So really neat thing that's working, of course, with that is obviously all connected to climate change and agriculture and natural resource and these practices, but introducing tribal specific ones. So identifying not just agriculture as being the traditional row crop type commercial agriculture, but also things like wild rice, identifying that as food. And we've been able to identify things that we're able to work with tribes on that, improving access roads and culverts and for aquatic organism passages. And one of the other areas we want to work in, I know Rob Kroll, I've seen him on there, is working for maple syrup. How can we introduce EQIP programs and these incentives to work with the maple syrup industry? And tribes are well involved in that. There's a lot going on with maple syrup in the sugar bush areas and how we can introduce energy efficiency, for example, for cooking down the sap into maple syrup. So yeah, I think that's the exciting things is looking at the opportunities, looking at the tribe's interest in agriculture, feeding their own people. Again, wild rice, the community gardens, the maple syrup industry, and considering that whole time while it's being developed now is to make sure that the environment's protected and improved, instead of coming in kind of after and how can we make improvements on perhaps bad practices now, being able to implement those when they're first beginning. I think that's the exciting part, is seeing the interest out there, what's going on.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Maria, are you back and want to jump back in? Or
yeah, I'm really sorry about that. It's really unusual that happens. But yeah, I think the one thing from where I dropped that I just wanted to highlight that it pertains to the CASC is so I think from the perspective of NIACS and also our work with the as coordinating the USDA Northern Forest Climate Hub, is that we've been actively engaged in supporting organizations and working in climate adaptation for a really long time. And so right now we convene a lot of communities of practice and networks related to climate adaptation, and we bring a lot of people together in conversation. And so I think what's really exciting is in thinking about, sort of this ability of getting, science to management and then management back to science. I think we have these really, through developing, all the adaptation demonstrations, through the work that we do for climate adaptation trainings and a lot of other pieces where we've really embedded deeply in the region. I think that provides us a great opportunity to help be a connector and a magnifier of the CASC's work, because we have these really deep and robust networks, and we have, just the most astute and proactive managers and practitioners who are really keen and eager for science from the CASC, from the many, federal and university and other private partners who are at the table. And so I'm really excited, I think, about those connecting opportunities because there's such a demand for so many new science topics, and getting that into people's hands so they can do great work.
Great, thanks, Maria. Well, I heard a lot of exciting things myself that are, following up on partnerships, work already on the ground. Olivia introduced the priorities today that we created from working with our advisory committee, as well as other resources in the region. So what I want to do now is put those back up, and I'm going to go right back to Jeff, because Jeff, I feel like you were starting to get into it a little bit with talking about the wild rice and the culverts and passageways for wildlife that you guys are looking to prioritize with climate. So if you would, I'm going to put up the priorities and just speak to which priorities for your organization you want us to know about, and then pitch it to whoever on the panel next you want to pick, Jeff. So you get to pick Brad, Erin, or Maria.
So yeah, and again, that list was it was a long one. I mean, looking at the priorities, again, look at all the stuff that we're talking about, that impact on fish and wildlife. I know the tribes are interested in that. Fluctuations of water levels, big impact for, it's not just water quality, but water quantity, dealing with wild rice. Forest composition, one of our partner tribes, of course, on WCAC is Menominee, as one of the oldest sustainable forests anywhere, and doing a great job of that. But looking at the future, what they're planning today, what'll be the success of those trees in 20, 50 years. They really have to think ahead, as opposed to what a lot of the thinking is now. And I did look at these, and I just think all of them are of concern, and not just the ones that have tribal in the access the potential for range shifts or local exploration for food species from tribal lands, but just all of them that we're dealing with, or to say that we're dealing with, they're going to be thinking about them for planning in the future, and that's just so important that we have now. And to me, of course, is the adaptation. How do tribes adapt to these things? There's a lot of talk, and I know tribes are interested in how you reduce the worst impacts of climate change. But thinking of that shorter term is that how do tribes survive climate change? I think that's going to be the big thing. And I think the environment, of course, the natural resources, the impact on those, their way of life, and agriculture, how they're going to feed their own people. I have been looking, I did talk to Olivia a little bit on the priorities and how to get these down and what the needs are from the tribes. And it just, I can't pick on one and say this is most important. Everything on this list is important. But being on this, I hope I can bring that as kind of that connection to the 11 tribes in Wisconsin as partners for all of this, and be able to communicate with them, and also what they're doing. So if we can get information from the tribes on what they're doing too, this can be a benefit to this group too.
Are you picking the next person, or you want me to?
Oh, geez. Oh, Maria, make sure her internet's still working. How about Maria?
Hey, thanks. All right, well, I'll try and keep this brief, and then I'll kick it to folks. So yeah, I'll highlight 4.1, determine the future composition, ecological function and distribution of forests, because that's been a place where we've worked really deeply to develop vulnerability assessments, and we can bring a lot of resources through the U.S. Forest Service and our other partners to this. But I think it's really foundational in working with all of the CASC partners, because it's sort of this fundamental science about these habitats of which, all of the other work can, be hinges on. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to take these kind of early vulnerability assessments that we have done and really look at what are what else does that mean for these other benefits, or other implications for the region, like tribal resources or cultural resources. I think we've done a lot of work on urban forests and equity, urban wildlife, and then of course all of the forest dependent wildlife as well. So that's one that I think, we have a lot of resources and investment into that we're really excited about. And then, yeah, I think likewise, some of the ones related to, 4.5.4 and 5.8 is these, climate informed decision support tools and practices for co-benefits. Oh, Kristen, your screen, is shifting, so I wasn't sure if you're aware. But again, I think that's one where we can really bring the science and the management together. And I'm really excited about some of the work that's already been funded by the Midwest CASC to look at adaptation outcomes. So that way we can, be doing this adaptive management in terms of we're trying things through our adaptation demonstrations and through the work that people are doing, getting that feedback on what's working, what's salient, and then deploying that out as we create new projects. So just a few thoughts. I'll kick it to Brad.
All right, yeah, so this is a great list of priorities, and frankly, the whole set that this subset was pulled from was a excellent list of priorities. In fact, when I shared it with folks across the different programs in the Fish and Wildlife Service, they had a really hard time pinning down which should be a set of priorities. But one thing I will note is obviously we're in landscape dominated by water. Water drives a whole lot in this region, and so those first three are really pretty important, especially the changes in rainfall and then the associated impacts on our water systems. That impacts everything from the way we manage our national wildlife refuges and the wetlands that are typically associated with those to freshwater mussels and the potential impacts of sedimentation or just changes in water flow and temperatures. I mean, there's so much there with water. One thing that I am going to note that doesn't fit so neatly on this list of priorities is what we're finding, or what we hear in the Fish and Wildlife Service quite often is when we start to talk about climate change adaptation is, we're doing the right thing, conserving landscapes, protecting landscapes, trying to enhance the landscapes or restore them back to good conditions. It's all the stuff, it's the strategies that most folks say to do. And so we quite often we hear, well, we're already doing it, in which many cases we are. But I think quite often we're still struggling with how do we do climate change adaptation with intent and actually put it within a decision-making framework and what Maria was just talking to, which is go back and test to see how all our actions are doing. And so I think that's a place for us to continue to work. It doesn't fit neatly in these priorities, but it gets back to, I think, a little bit that one of those elements that I talked about in the CCAP, which is expertise and skills in the Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'll note that there is not a single individual in the Midwest region that has climate in their job title. And so it's something that we need to really continue to push in the Fish and Wildlife Service. So anyway, a great list of priorities. And I guess that leaves Erin to talk about how these fit in their organization.
I like following you, Brad, because you prompt me to agree with you. I think that last point is especially important about, frameworks and how none of this neatly fits. And it's very addressing it and thinking about it and planning for it is pervasive and needs to be pervasive. And we're not there yet, but we're all working on it, which I think is really important. So I had just identified a couple aspects of this that are maybe a little more forefront in my mind just because of some of our Midwest. I think, as Brad said, you know, I work a lot more in the aquatic realm with the Great Lakes. But as Maria said, you know, our forest systems are also really important in this CASC. And so, and in certain areas of the parks, I think in some ways, you know, they've got a strong lakeshore component and they have an equally important forest component. And so one of the aspects that I think we're really interested in, we haven't developed it very much at this point yet because we have other planning mechanisms in place, but there's this idea about climate analogs. And so for 5.1, assessing the feasibility of current and potential ecological restoration goals under future conditions, you know, we've got these scenario planning ability, which in and of itself can be very intensive effort, right? But then I think one aspect that might be helpful at that management level, and to kind of maybe boil down some of the science, is to see the, you know, if you're looking at Lake Michigan park, what is that potential future scenario look like in another place? So that's what I mean by the climate analog. So is there a, you know, a Nebraska city that is going to have a similar climate compared to under these future scenarios? And that just helps people, I think, do a mental picture of what some of those future conditions look like, and instead of a lot of the data or the graphs or the information. And so that's one area that we've been talking to parks about and getting some interest in it, and some feedback. But again, we have a small but mighty group of experts who work on this. And then it's sort of, as Brad said, an added duty as assigned right now for a lot of people. So the other component I think I just want to mention is, luckily, our inventory monitoring program started almost 20 years, or more than 20 years ago now, right around there. And so that informing the design of monitoring programs or detecting response to, we are just kicking off inventory 2.0, as we're calling it. And so hoping to learn a lot more about inventory 1.0 and how, you know, there's a wealth of data there. And as they're entering the next phase, they have a new program director as well. And so trying to figure out how to include a lot more of that with, you know, I wouldn't even call it status quo resources. It's probably diminishing resources at this point in terms of the ability to even maintain some of those inventories that they've been doing for 20 years. So I'll pause there and pass it back.
Thanks. It was really interesting to hear all of you all talk about it. And I think Jessica actually wrote that in the chat. And you all, I think, shared some of the questions she had about what you think and what they need in your region. So thank you. I want to be cognizant of our time. We have about 10 minutes left. So I want to do a lightning question, which means try to time yourself, give yourself like 30 seconds to speak to a different group on this call that we usually try to engage, which is our students and staff who are looking to get involved in climate. So it's a two-parter. You know, if you could say in 30 seconds, what's a good way to engage with your organization and your work, or what is a recommended conference or resource to follow up on for the climate research that you and your organization are a part of? And I'll just pick random. So Maria, you want to go first? Look at her face.
Well, you can just email us. So we say we're the Climate Change Help Desk. So just call us up, email us to get a hold of us. I would say for students and staff, you know, I think just going to professional conferences, you know, where the practitioners are, and then just engaging in questions about climate change. I think it's been amazing to see how the discussion around climate change has evolved over 15 years, and people are really active and excited to talk about it and talk about their problems. And so I think that's just a great first step, is trying to get, you know, kind of out into the wild, into the field, and be talking with people about their work.
Excellent. Brad, you're up.
Yeah, pretty much the same answer. I would say if you're going to reach out to someone and you have specific questions on who to engage in the Fish and Wildlife Service in conversations about climate change, or even just questions for the various programs, reach out to us in Science Applications. I happen to be the regional point of contact on that climate change action program. So I guess that would be me. And then I'll sort you out to the right people. But yeah, get in there in conferences. I don't have any specific ones to mention. If you're going to encounter Fish and Wildlife Service staff, you probably see them at a Midwest, but any number of other locations, the Midwest Fish and Wildlife Conference, our attendances can be limited though to at a number of these things. So, but yeah, I would gladly help anyone out if they had questions on how navigating the Fish and Wildlife Service and who to talk to.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Erin, and then Jeff, we'll have you close us out.
Yeah, I echo that as well. And I think the one thing I would add is right now, I feel like it's important to be thinking about the science, but really also that management application. So in our case, as I mentioned, our structure is just a little bit different in some ways. I am happy to be that point of contact and probably easiest for everybody as the Park Service representative on the Midwest CASC to kind of redirect you. But I also think developing relationships at the park level or with some of those local natural resource practitioners is really important. We have, as an example, at Apostle Islands, there's somebody who is intensively involved in climate change and planning for that park, as well as nationwide. So it's kind of a mix, and I always like to put a plug in for the science is important, but the application right now is really important.
Thanks, Jeff. Go ahead.
So yeah, Christy, you did mention students and those thinking, and I was just trying to think of that. And if you look at the FY23 priorities there, it was only 5.8, the co-benefits that listed on there. The only one that really mentioned people. So it's so important when we talk about this, we have to have people in there. And I've always said that whether it be the Wisconsin DNR or the EPA, ultimately, if you keep asking why we're doing something, it's got to be public health. These are public health agencies. They're not environmental agencies. They're public health agencies, and what the impact is and what we put in the environment has on people. So I'd like to relate that more to that and just where that comes from and just share with that. I've obviously been around a long time, but I remember in 1998 going to a climate change adaptation conference, and it was the CDC was one of the main presenters there. One of the speakers there, this again in 1998, said talking about adapting to climate change, and one of the recommendations where they said they need to have increased funding and sizes for domestic abuse programs. When asked the why of it, because they said the disruption of economic systems from climate change and sea level rise will have an impact on domestic abuse. That is the way to think of climate change, is not being one program where someone says, I'm a climate change person. It's every program is a climate change person. Every program has to deal with that, from transportation and social services to everything that we do now is got to be looking at climate change. So I guess my point was for students to be thinking of it, where are the people in any of these plans, any of these strategies, and how does everything work together?
Great. Yes. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was a great way to kind of bring us back, to where our feet hit the road, I guess. I want to just share that our next meeting, I have a little slide here, is coming up on May 23rd at 12 Central. Oh, Olivia's back. Olivia, I'll pitch it to you. No?
I was going to say that's fine. Yeah, no, the third Monday of the month, May 23rd at 12. So look for additional details on the topic. So.
And this is Jessica. I'll add in, if anyone has suggestions on future topics, we said we would dedicate these early months to introductions. And I think that's been working well as we get started, but other ideas folks have about what they might like to hear about in this setting, please toss those our way.
Yeah, and thank you so much to our panel again. I think we all learned a lot, and we could hear some of your passion coming through. So thank you for just reminding us all that we are doing this hard work in the trenches together and not independently. Just wanted to also point out, some people wrote, in the chat questions. If you don't get a hold of the folks who've offered you their emails on this call, definitely reach out to us at the CASC. Jessica, Olivia, or myself, we're happy to connect you. We want to help build this community in this virtual space as best we can. That's why I think also on this slide is the sign up list. So don't forget to sign up if you're not getting notifications for these. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.